Omotara shined brighter than anyone that evening. She had worked so hard, and now she stood as the pride of her university, the best of her class. The hall in Abuja was filled with music, colors, and laughter. Rich relatives, old family friends, classmates, and business partners of her late father filled every seat. Everyone had come to celebrate her, to honor her success, and the entire event felt like a royal gathering. People whispered about her intelligence, her beauty, and how she carried herself with so much grace despite the heavy loss of her father years ago. In the crowd, her mother Balyawatife sat quietly. Her smile looked warm to others, but Omotara felt something cold in it. Balyawatife had always been controlling, always making decisions for everyone in the family. Yet tonight, there was a strange tension in her eyes, as if she was guarding a secret. Still, no one paid attention because the music was loud, the dancers were lively, and the master of ceremony kept the guests entertained. When the time came for the toast, the MC lifted his voice, asking everyone to raise their glasses for the star of the night. Before anyone else could step forward, Balyawatife stood quickly and said she would give her daughter the first drink herself. She walked across the hall holding a polished glass filled with palm wine. Her hand steady though her eyes seemed unsettled. Omotara smiled politely, but as she lifted the glass close to her lips, a sharp memory pierced her heart. The smell of the drink was unmistakable. It was her father's private brew, the one he always locked away. No one was allowed near it. She froze, her hand trembling. Her chest grew heavy, and tears suddenly rolled down her face. The music stopped, and the crowd grew silent. Guests whispered in confusion, asking why she was crying over a glass of wine. Omotara's voice broke as she remembered the hidden cellar in her father's house. Only two people had keys, her father and her mother. Questions spread like fire among the guests. Uncles and elders demanded an explanation, but Balyawatife's voice shook as she tried to call it a coincidence. Then Omotara pulled out a sealed letter, the very one her father had written before his death. In front of everyone, she revealed his truth. He had left behind not just words but proof of betrayal. Lawyers stepped forward, confirming that she was now the rightful heir to everything her father owned. The hall erupted, some in shock, others in praise. Omotara wiped her tears, lifted her head high, and walked out with dignity. Those who once doubted her bowed in respect as she passed. Her mother, Balyawatife, sat among the well-dressed guests with a smile that looked sweet from far away, but up close it carried a strange chill. She was known as a woman who always wanted her way, someone who loved to be in control of every move in the family. People often admired her elegance, but behind that charm was a sharpness that few dared to question. On this night of her daughter's grand success, when everyone expected joy and pride from a mother, there was something uneasy in her eyes. Balyawatife clapped at the right moments, nodded at every compliment given to Omotara, and even leaned in to whisper polite words to those seated beside her. Yet her gaze often shifted back to her daughter, lingering too long, filled with a heaviness that no one else noticed. It was as if she was carrying a storm inside her heart, trying to hide it behind jewelry and bright fabric. People around her believed she was simply emotional from pride, but Omotara felt that stare. She knew it was not love shining in her mother's eyes. It was something far more complicated. The hall buzzed with laughter, camera flashes, and music. Waiters carried trays of food, old classmates hugged Omotara, and relatives praised her achievements. Still, Balyawatife seemed slightly detached, her fingers tapping nervously on the glass in her hand. Every time someone mentioned Omotara's father, her jaw tightened. Every time the MC reminded the guests that this was a night to celebrate the graduate's bright future, her lips curved in a smile, but her eyes gave her away. Omotara noticed it most when the spotlight turned on her for a moment of honor. The crowd rose to cheer, but Balyawatife's expression flickered. Just a second of unease before she forced the smile back onto her face. It was the kind of look that made Omotara's chest tighten. She could not explain it, but she felt her mother's gaze carried a hidden message, like a shadow following her steps even in the middle of so much light. As the music softened and the hall prepared for the formal toast, Omotara sensed the tension growing. Her mother's eyes followed her every move with an intensity that felt heavier than pride. It was as though Balyawatife knew something no one else did, and beneath her calm mask, that secret was pressing hard against her smile. The MC's voice echoed across the bright hall, asking everyone to rise and prepare for a toast in honor of Omotara. Guests lifted their glasses, smiles wide and voices filled with cheer, ready to celebrate her moment. The clinking of cups began, but before anyone could step forward, Baliawatife stood up quickly. All eyes turned toward her as she raised her hand, insisting that she would be the one to give her daughter the first drink. Her voice was calm but firm, leaving no room for anyone else to interfere. She walked gracefully to the front, her wrapper sweeping the polished floor, her heels clicking with each step. In her hand was a glass of palm wine, the liquid rich and golden under the lights. People clapped politely, believing it to be a touching gesture from a proud mother to her child. "It is only right," she said softly, "that the first drink of the night comes from me, her mother." Guests nodded in agreement, smiling at what seemed like a heartfelt tradition. Omotara stood, a little surprised but not wanting to offend. She accepted the glass with both hands, bowing her head slightly as the crowd murmured blessings. The music slowed, and for a moment, it felt like the whole celebration had paused to watch this symbolic exchange. Balyawatife's face held a smile that seemed almost too perfect, her eyes shining with something no one else could name. She placed her hand gently over Omotara's for a brief moment before stepping back, leaving her daughter at the center of attention. The MC lifted his own glass high, asking everyone to join in, but all eyes stayed fixed on Omotara. She lifted the drink closer to her lips, her fingers trembling slightly under the weight of the moment. The scent of the wine drifted upward, filling her senses, pulling at memories buried deep in her heart. The guests waited eagerly, ready to shout, "Cheers!" As soon as she took the first sip, Balyawatife's eyes did not leave her daughter for even a second. The hall grew quiet, the kind of silence that carries more tension than sound. The spotlight shone on Omotara, and for that brief instant, time seemed to slow. To everyone else, it looked like a proud mother's blessing, but underneath the lights and music, something much darker lingered in the simple act of a glass being passed from mother to child. Omotara lifted the glass slowly, her hand steady at first, but as the rim neared her lips, something made her stop. The sweet but sharp scent rose into her nose, and in that instant, her heart skipped a beat. She froze, her chest tightening, as memories flooded her mind. This was not just any palm wine. It carried a smell she could never forget. It was her father's secret brew, the one he had crafted with his own hands, the one he kept locked away like treasure. Her father, Atakunal, had been protective of that drink, saying it was not meant for casual use. He stored it in a hidden cellar, far from curious eyes, and always kept the keys close. Omotara remembered being a child, watching him carefully measure and taste it, proud of what he had made. No bottle ever left that place, not while he was alive. And yet here it was in her hand, on the night meant to honor her, long after his sudden and mysterious death. Her breath grew unsteady, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The hall around her was still filled with chatter, but she no longer heard it. All she could focus on was that smell, pulling her back into the moment of loss when she had buried her father. It was like his spirit was whispering through the glass, warning her of something hidden. She lowered the drink slightly, her fingers trembling as the room's brightness blurred through her tears. Guests leaned forward, puzzled by her hesitation. To them, it was only palm wine, a simple symbol of celebration. But to Omotara, it was the echo of a secret too powerful to ignore. Her mind raced with questions. How could this drink be here? Who had taken it out of the cellar? And why, of all nights, had it appeared in her hand now? Her eyes shifted toward her mother, who was standing just a few steps away, watching closely. The same cold smile rested on her face, but her fingers twisted nervously at her side. Omotara's chest grew heavier as suspicion began to form. This was no mistake. The drink had meaning, and her mother knew it. The sweet aroma of the brew was no longer comforting. It was a warning, a key unlocking the truth her father had left behind. Omotara could no longer hold back the wave of emotions pressing against her chest. The moment the familiar scent filled her lungs, her strength gave way. Right there in the center of the shining hall, in front of every guest, she burst into tears. Her body shook as she covered her face, the glass still trembling in her hand. Laughter and claps that had filled the room only seconds before melted into confusion. The music stopped, and the sound of her sobs echoed across the decorated walls. The guests exchanged puzzled glances, whispering among themselves. Why is she crying? One voice asked softly. Another leaned closer and muttered, It's only palm wine. Why would it make her break down like this? No one could understand the reason behind her sudden collapse. To the crowd, this was supposed to be a moment of joy, not sorrow. Yet they could see the pain written all over her face, pain too deep to fake. Omotara struggled to speak, her lips trembling as tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Her mind was spinning, memories of her father crashing into her heart. She remembered his laughter, his strict rules about the hidden brew, his warnings that it was not for public eyes. The glass in her hand felt heavier by the second, as though her father himself had placed it there to remind her of something unfinished. She could barely breathe as the weight of truth pressed harder on her. The hall remained silent except for soft murmurs. Elders shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the strange scene unfolding before them. Classmates who had been cheering moments earlier stood frozen, unsure whether to comfort her or stay back. Every eye was on her, and every second of her crying deepened the tension in the room. Her tears were not just from grief, but from realization. She was not simply mourning her father again. She was beginning to understand the hidden meaning behind that drink. The palm wine was no accident, and the presence of it on this night was no coincidence. Though the crowd was lost in confusion, Omotara's heart was screaming with clarity. Something dangerous, something dark, tied her mother to this glass. And as she cried harder, she knew that this moment was the beginning of a truth too heavy for anyone to ignore. Omotara wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. As she looked at the glass again, her mind went back to the house she grew up in, back to the wooden door that led to the hidden cellar. That place had always been forbidden, guarded like treasure, and only two people ever had the keys, her father, Atakuno, and her mother, Bayawataif. The thought struck her like lightning. Her father was gone, and yet the same brew now sat in her hands. The question burned in her heart. How could it have left that cellar unless her mother had brought it out? Her voice cracked as she finally spoke, her words trembling but sharp enough to silence the whispers around her. This drink, it could only come from one place. The guests leaned in, their curiosity pulling them closer. She continued, her eyes fixed on Bayawataif. My father never shared it with anyone. He locked it away. Only one other person could touch it. The air grew heavy as all eyes turned to her mother. Bayawataif shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around her wrapper. She forced a smile, trying to wave it off as if her daughter was imagining things. It is only palm wine, Omotara, she said lightly, though her voice shook. But the tremor in her tone betrayed her, and the guests caught it. Murmurs rippled across the hall as people began to question what was really happening. Omotara's words grew stronger as her tears dried. No, Mama. This is not just wine. This is Papa's secret brew, the one he never let anyone touch. I remember the keys. I remember everything. The hall fell into a deeper silence. Elders frowned, uncles shifted forward, and classmates stared wide-eyed. Everyone was waiting for Bayawataif to explain, but instead of answers, she looked cornered. The weight of the accusation hung in the air, pressing down on every guest. Bayawataif opened her mouth to speak again, but her hand trembled, and her eyes darted away. For the first time that evening, her cold smile cracked. Omotara's voice had awakened suspicion in the crowd, and now the once celebratory hall was charged with tension. The daughter had spoken her truth, and the mother stood exposed under the questioning eyes of everyone present. Elders and uncles stood from their seats, their faces hard with authority, their voices echoing through the silent hall. Bayawataif, explain yourself, one of them demanded firmly. Another leaned forward, eyes narrowing. How could this drink appear here if only Atakuno and you had the keys? Their words cut through the murmurs of the guests, and suddenly, every conversation stopped. All attention was fixed on the woman who had been smiling only moments before. Bayawataif shifted in her chair, forcing a laugh that sounded too thin to be real. It is only palm wine, she said quickly. Surely others must have had access, or maybe it was kept and forgotten. She waved her hand lightly, as though brushing away dust, but her gesture did not match her trembling fingers. The glass she held shook slightly, betraying the calm mask she tried to wear. The elders caught it, and their eyes grew sharper. Whispers spread across the hall like fire. Some guests leaned closer to one another saying, "She is hiding something." Others whispered, Why does her hand shake if it is only wine? The tension rose higher with every passing second. Even the younger cousins and classmates who had once been cheering for Omotara now watched with wide, uneasy eyes. One of the older uncles slammed his walking stick on the ground. "This is no time for games," he said sternly. "If there is a truth hidden here, it must come out tonight." The weight of his words filled the hall, pressing down on Bayawataif. She tried to lift her chin, tried to hold her dignity, but the unease in her eyes betrayed her. Her lips parted as though she wanted to answer, yet no words came. Omotara stood silently, watching her mother's mask begin to crack. She had never seen her mother look so cornered, so powerless before a crowd. The guests waited, restless and impatient, their murmurs growing louder. Every second of silence only made the suspicion stronger. Bayawataif finally spoke again, her voice lower this time, almost pleading. "It is a coincidence. Nothing more." But the shake in her hands told another story. The hall no longer believed her charm, no longer trusted her smile. The pressure around her grew heavier, and everyone could feel that a secret was about to break open. Whether she admitted it or not, Omotara's hands were still trembling, but her eyes had grown firm. The questions, the whispers, the pressure from the elders, all of it pushed her to act. Slowly, she reached into her small purse and pulled out an envelope that had been sealed for years. The paper was aged, the handwriting on it instantly recognizable to those who had known her father. Gasps echoed across the hall as people leaned closer to see. "What is that?" someone whispered. Omotara's voice broke through the tension, steady but filled with emotion. "This is my father's letter, written before he died. He left it for me, but he warned me to open it only when the truth was ready to be revealed." The room fell into complete silence. Every eye was on the envelope, every breath held back. Omotara tore it open gently, unfolding the paper with care. Her voice shook as she began to read, but the words carried power. Her father had written about trust, about betrayal, about the things he had built with his own hands. And then came the part that made the crowd shift uncomfortably in their seats. He wrote that his wife had turned against him, that she had tried to claim his secrets, and that the palm wine in the hidden cellar was proof of what she had done. Gasps filled the room, some guests covering their mouths in shock. The wine that Bayawataif had so proudly handed her daughter was not a blessing at all. It was evidence, the final key that connected her to her husband's downfall. The elders exchanged sharp glances, and the whispers grew louder, turning into waves of disbelief. Omotara's hands shook as she lowered the letter, but her eyes locked onto her mother's. "This drink was not meant for tonight," she said firmly. "It was never meant to be in my hands. But Papa's words have made it clear. This was his proof, and now the truth has spoken." Bayawataif's face paled, the cold smile gone. Her body stiffened as guests stared at her with judgment and anger. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. The weight of the letter, the undeniable truth of her husband's words, left her powerless. What had started as a night of joy had turned into the stage of her downfall, and nothing she could say could erase what had just been revealed. The silence in the hall was broken when two men in suits stepped forward from the crowd. They were lawyers who had worked with Ayanda for many years, men the family knew well. One of them cleared his throat and spoke with authority, his words carrying across the room. "According to the instructions left by Ayanda before his passing, and with this letter as confirmation, Omotara is the rightful heir to his entire estate." The declaration struck the hall like thunder. Guests gasped, some clapped in shock, while others simply stared, too stunned to speak. The lawyer continued, unfolding official documents to prove his words. He explained how Ayanda had placed everything under strict legal terms, ensuring that his daughter would inherit when the time was right. Lands, properties, businesses, accounts. Every detail had been carefully written down. As he spoke, Omotara felt tears welling in her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of relief. For years she had doubted her place, always feeling overshadowed by her mother's control. Now the truth had finally set her free. Bayawataif, however, looked as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had managed to command respect and power in the family for so long, but in a matter of minutes, it had been stripped away. The same people who had once bowed to her now turned their eyes to Omotara. The elders nodded in agreement with the lawyers, confirming that the will of the late Ayanda must be honored without question. Murmurs filled the hall again. But this time they carried admiration for Omotara. Relatives who had once doubted her now whispered blessings, classmates cheered softly, and even the business associates in fine suits gave approving nods. The shift was undeniable. The daughter once seen as secondary now stood as the head of her father's legacy. Balyawataif tried one last time to defend herself, reaching out as if words could undo what had been revealed. But the lawyers were firm. The estate no longer belongs to you, one of them said coldly. From this moment you hold no authority. The truth was final, and there was no escape. Omotara stood tall in the center of the hall, her dignity shining. The power her mother once used against her was gone, and the future now rested fully in her hands. Tears slowly dried on Omotara's cheeks as she stood tall in the center of the grand hall. The girl who had walked in as a graduate now stood as the true heir of her father's legacy. The pain that had broken her moments earlier was replaced with a strength that lit up her face. She gathered herself with quiet grace, her step steady, her head held high. The whispers that once carried doubt now carried respect. The same guests who had once questioned her worth lowered their eyes as she passed, ashamed of how they had misjudged her. The elders bowed their heads slightly, a gesture of honor that carried more weight than words. Friends and classmates parted the way, allowing her to walk forward untouched. Even the wealthy business associates, who had earlier focused their admiration on her mother, now directed their nods toward her. Each step she took felt like a victory, a silent declaration that the truth could not be hidden forever. Balyawataif remained seated, frozen in her chair, her proud mask shattered. She could not stop what had unfolded, could not pull back the power that had slipped from her hands. All she could do was watch her daughter rise in front of the very people she had once controlled. The sight of Omotara leaving the hall with dignity was a reminder that no lie lasts forever. As Omotara reached the exit, she turned for a brief moment. Her eyes scanned the hall one last time, seeing the faces that now looked at her not with doubt, but with respect and admiration. The weight of her father's letter, the truth of his legacy, and the support of those present had lifted her spirit. She walked out not as the daughter of a betrayed man, but as the woman who carried his name forward with honor. The music never returned. The hall remained heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of her heels against the floor. Omotara's walk was more than movement. It was triumph, proof that dignity and truth would always win over deceit. Hi, bestie Sparkles, thank you so much for watching till the end. Sparkling heart, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing stories. Raising hands, see you next time.